and what their spring might look like. Keith, the first thing that strikes you when you think about what's going to happen down at Port St. Lucie this February is a lot of veteran faces meeting each other for the first time ever.
Yeah, or perhaps reintroducing each other in the case of Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer. So we'll start there, guys. Obviously, the Mets have had a solid rotation and Cy Young winners at the top before, but you look at the bottom there. Last year between DeGrom and Scherzer, 34 games started between the two of them in just over 200 innings. You go back to the 5 seasons that Verlander and Scherzer had as rotation mates in Detroit, they averaged 32 starts per year, basically. Scherzer missed a couple turns in the rotation over that stretch. Verlander basically healthy the entire time, never even skipped a start or anything like that. It's almost 10 years past since that happened, but if they can be on the field and healthy all season, that'll obviously be a great start for that
Keith,
Mets
that's
rotation.
pretty remarkable. Are there 2 guys that logged what they did back there 10 years ago that are still doing what they're doing at the
It was
level they're
basically, in terms of the workload in those 5 years, it was basically those 2 and Kershaw at the top of the leaderboard. So Kershaw's still hanging around, but obviously there's not many from that era that are still.
Yeah, I mean, you think about some of the guys that were on those staffs, right? Doug Fister's been out of the game for a while.
Yeah.
David Price just stepped away.
Price, Rick Porcello, like it's those guys,
Right.
and
Yeah,
they're
Anibal
still among the
Sanchez.
best ever.
Yeah. All right, Keith, got more, I'm
How
sure.
about another rotation addition for the Mets this offseason? Kodai Senga. I think there's just some general excitement here like there always is
He's
when
my
you're
favorite
talking
so
about the
far.
unknown. I think he's going to be good. He's a very intriguing pickup for them. If he can replicate what Chris Bassett did in the middle of that rotation, that'll be.
Sing a song.
What was that? Do you want to drop a couple more bars for us there, H?
This is a high-end all-star pitcher.
All right, he could be a high-end all-star pitcher. He certainly was in Japan. We'll see how he fares in Major League Baseball. Now, Matty, you mentioned this in the A block there about the third base situation. Obviously a tough pill to swallow with Correa, but look how Eduardo Escobar finished the season here. Basically replicated his Bauer numbers from the entire season in that final month, and you see on the bottom those 3 numbers, home runs, RBIs, and OPS, all top 10 in the majors. And Matty, as you mentioned, he's obviously had plenty of good seasons, so there's a track record there that you can feel confident in. And last one for you guys, the #1 overall prospect in the game, Francisco Alvarez. How does he make an impact on the season? How soon do we see him? Can he provide a spark? Or, if they missed out on their biggest fish in free agency, do they swim in the deep waters at the trade deadline with this guy potentially being at the center of a package for a hitter, for a pitcher, maybe a guy who hits and pitches? I don't know.
Or is there a way we could maybe Photoshop him not to look like Reverend Run? What's he doing with the hat on? That's a Photoshopped hat, and we put it on crooked.
I don't know. I think it projects confidence. I like the look.
All right.
I got one thing to throw at you guys outside of the photo. Just a little something, and you may have to come back later in the show and give us the answer, Keith. But if you're the New York Mets, how many guys are you going to lose at WBC? I've got 9 in the top of my head right now.
Yeah, they're definitely one of the teams that are going to have a big number of their 40-man roster participating. You mentioned that the other day. I think that's a great point to keep an eye on in spring training. H, how many of these teams are split up by the WBC rosters?
Yeah, but is that really that important for a team like the Mets? A bunch of guys who are veterans who've been through multiple camps. They know exactly what to do to prepare. And let's face it, their workload, once they report to Mark DeRosa and Team USA, they're not going to be overworked. If anything, the concern is getting them enough work when they leave camp.
Yeah, I think the uniqueness of this year, though, in the case of the Mets, it's the first full spring for Buck. You know, you didn't have it really a spring training because of the lockout last year. You didn't meet the players. So you've had a chance to get through the season, talk about things. Like you get a chance when you go to spring training. All right, here's what we talked about at the end of the year. Did you get there? Did you know, I don't know, just different things like that.
Yeah, no, it all makes
Play
sense.
into it.
It's an easy team to dream on for sure, the New York Mets. Keith, thanks. Good stuff. We're going to keep going here on a Wednesday. And when we come back, we're going to go back to the Carlos Correa discussion with Do-Young Park, who covers the Twins on MLB.com. We'll get kind of the Twins' perspective on the chain of events that led Carlos Correa right back to Minnesota. We will make a move. Welcome back to Hot Stove on a Wednesday, presented by the General Insurance. On a day when the big story in baseball was what we learned of yesterday around midday, when Carlos Correa had agreed to a 6-year, $200 million deal to go back to the Minnesota Twins, not just a few months after saying goodbye to everybody there, hitting the market. Seemingly signing with the Giants, thought we was going to the Mets, and now he's back in the Twin Cities. Do-Young Park covers the Twins on MLB.com, joins us with some Minnesota perspective. Many questions for you, sir, on this reunited deal here with the Twins and Correa. Let's talk about contractually how much different this is based on what he had previously there, which was a 3-year deal with a series of opt-outs. How much different does this one look?
This is the long-term deal that Carlos Correa was seeking. I think it came in a very, very different form than I think he or Scott Boras could have hoped or foreseen. But I think it's just fundamentally different from last year's situation, and that I think last year it was pretty universally understood that it was a stopgap deal. The 3 years were built in as kind of injury protection for Correa. I think there was pretty good understanding that with a good year, even a so-so year for Correa, this was going to be a one-and-done kind of situation where he was always going to be looking for the long-term deal this offseason. So this is a match that, honestly, if you're on the Twins side, 6 years, $200 million is guaranteed to a player of Carlos Correa's caliber. I don't see how you can't like that deal. I mean, you can talk about all the injury concerns, the risks, and that sort of thing that might come up as part of this. That takes you through his age 33 season. That's in the prime of a shortstop of Carlos Correa's caliber, of his physical stature and that sort of thing. There's a lot of risk mitigation in the end with the vesting years that could pull this contract up to 10 seasons with a lot of protection for the Twins in that sense. And more than anything, it's up to 10 years in Minnesota for Carlos Correa, who was very open about the fact, especially at the end of last season when his contract talks came up, that whatever happens, he just wants to be able to not do this again, not worry about this in the next few years, and really put his roots down in an organization and help shape that organization. And now he'll get that chance in Minnesota, of all places. I don't think we all foresaw that this could end up back here.
For sure.
You know, it is amazing. Last year, when he did the 105 for 3 years, it was sticker shock, right? Like, wow, what a deal for Carlos. Now at 200 for 6, you go, that's really a nice job by the Twins, like you were documenting. I want to know what you learned being around Carlos last year and made the Twins want to have him back so badly. Outside of the numbers worked out great, but they really were dogmatic about trying to get him back. So why?
I think last year was really kind of a feel-it-out year. I think there was definitely interest, certainly on the Twins side, in a long-term relationship with a player like Carlos Correa when he essentially falls into your lap like that. I think we in the media didn't necessarily know what to expect. I don't think the Twins had really the full sense of what Carlos Correa, not just the player, but the person was like. All you need to do yesterday is look as soon as the news drops of Byron Buxton going ham on Twitter and on Instagram, being like, let's go, it's time to run it back.
Well, all I got to do is look at your smile, and you're excited about him being back.
Let me tell you, we're excited about this dude. He's just, we really enjoyed having him around last year. The Twins really enjoyed having him around last year in that he was only 27 years old, but all that playoff experience, all the life experience, it's really made him worldly and mature beyond his years in a way that I think imparts itself, especially on the young Latin American players in the clubhouse who looked up to him, but also on a guy like Byron Buxton. This is the guy he's going to be paired with up the middle in Minnesota through at least 2028 now, this physical goes through. And Buxton was super open last year about the fact that, you know, he's like, okay, Correa's taught me a lot about this game. He told me that, you know, it's something that I had to internalize. I don't need to go all in, crash into the wall on all these plays. There's a sense of preservation and availability. I love how he looks at the game. I love how he approaches this. I love the presence he brings. Buxton has been on that train since day one. You got to keep your superstar happy. I think he's really excited about this, and the clubhouse factor is a big deal in this as well. I think they learned a lot about that side of him in his presence.
I like that. You gave me some insight into Carlos's leadership, which, you know, a lot of people do not know. I'm going to ask you, though, if I'm Royce Lewis, I got to be sitting there going, all right, where do I fit? We just locked him up for 6 more years. This was a #1 pick who was a shortstop who they've made somewhat of a utility guy. What happens to Royce Lewis right now?
Well, it's not just Royce Lewis. There's also Brooks Lee. There's a lot of these guys coming up. Brooks Lee was their first rounder last year who jumped all the way up to Double-A last season. They're really high on him. He's their #1 prospect now. So you got 3 shortstops in the mix, but we've brought this up over and over again with Derek Falvey, and his stance remains this. it's never a bad thing to have too many up the middle guys on your roster. We'll figure that out if and when the time comes. There are, of course, questions about Royce Lewis right now. He only had a month in the big leagues last year without real chances for pitchers to make adjustments to him, for him to make adjustments to pitchers. He's out with another torn ACL until the late summer at least. And so you don't know how he's going to come back from that, what that's going to look like this year or next, how much more development he's going to need, because I think his acceleration to the big leagues was kind of quick last year. So we don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. Brooks Lee might be a third baseman moving forward. There's some questions about whether he'll be able to stick at shortstop. But I think right now, there's two ways to look at this. You can look at it as you've got some great athletes that you can mold around the center of the baseball diamond at the premier defensive positions. Royce Lewis is a guy without ego. That's his big thing. He was just so excited to be in the big leagues anywhere last year. And I think that's just kind of his personality. That's the attitude we've seen since he was drafted. And on the other side of that, the Twins are a team that'll always have pitching needs. If something happens, if the best case scenario happens, if all of them establish themselves as big league caliber shortstops, maybe that's where you get into a high-end trade conversation or that sort of thing. But right now, the Twins have no qualms with having too much elite up the middle talent, and that's where they're going to stand, at least until I think they have a little more certainty on how Royce responds from that torn ACL, how he gets back, and all that sort of thing.
Outlook for the Twins a lot rosier in 2023 and beyond with the re-addition of Carlos Correa. Doe, we appreciate the visit, man. Thanks for chiming in here, and thanks for the Twins perspective.